We were heading to the Avalon Peninsula on the eastern part of Newfoundland. Our first stop was in Cavendish to visit a friend, and we drove to St. John's afterwards. Welcome to our escapades. Ursula is the navigator, my name is Dieter, and I'm the wheelman. Before we get into the travel stories, the real Avalon Peninsula is the eastern part with St. John's and everything to the south. Our first stop was on the Verde Peninsula, where we drove along the coastline. Then we planned to take the ferry from Argentia to Nova Scotia, which is on the southwest arm, but we ran out of time to explore this part. We had 2 nights in the Golden Arm Park in Greens Harbour. Heading north, we got a good look at the shag rock in Whitway Bay. These isolated rock formations got their nickname from the shag, a species of cormorant. They roost in these kinds of rocks. If you are preparing for a trip to Newfoundland, you likely saw these 3 beach huts. They are in Cavendish. Driving north, it was difficult to get really excited about shag rocks and beach huts, but thanks to the ice cream and espresso bar in Green Harbour, we were in good spirits. The espresso shot was keeping us alert. We noticed some red rocks along the shore and had to take a closer look. These rocks are from the Crown Hill Formation, a sedimentary formation from about 550 million years ago, only visible in very few places here on Newfoundland. On closer inspection, we found rockweed. It is rich on iodine and sold as a nutritional supplement, as we found out on Gramenan back in 2018, where it is commercially harvested. Please hit the subscribe button and get notified when we publish our Gramenan adventure. Moving up the coast, we stopped in Heart's Content at the cable station historic site. It served as the western terminus of the first permanent transoceanic submarine telegraph cable, while a sister cable station in Ireland served as the eastern terminus. It was in operation from 1866 and remained active until it closed in 1965. Stepping into the cable station feels like turning back the time. It is a well-preserved time capsule. The first Heart's Content lighthouse was built in 1901, 35 years after the first telegraph transmission. An excellent spot to soak in the sun and relax for a while. About 20 kilometers further north is Hans Harbour, a quiet fishing village with a lighthouse that is in operation since 1881. South from the lighthouse, we were looking at the breakwall and the town. We kept on driving past Old Pelican. The road turned to gravel and deteriorated the further up we got. About halfway up to the most northern point, we decided to turn around and take the Highway 70 to Verde. The town of Verde sits on a peninsula. It is a picturesque fishing village with a visitor center and viewing platform overlooking the harbor. We watched the fishing boats unload at the processing plant. We spent some time visiting the heritage premises, an interesting exhibit of old tools and an amazing view as we walked down the stairs to the harbor. Driving south along the coast, it is impossible to miss the big ship in Harbour Grace. The SS Kyle sits on a mussel bank and slowly decays. The ship was built in 1912 in England, changed ownership a few times and has been sitting there since 1967. The Spirit of Harbour Grace is a 1943 Douglas aircraft. In front of the airplane is the Amelia Earhart statue. She took off from here in Harbour Grace and was the first woman to complete a solo transatlantic flight. Our next stop was in Briggs. This is the tunnel that was built to unload the ship for the famous Captain Abram Bartlett. The town is known for its well-kept old-style houses, and that includes the church. The St. George's Church was built in 1876. Our last stop on the Verde Peninsula round trip was in Dildo. The town came to international fame because of the late-night talk show host Jimmy Kimmel in 2019. My personal reason for visiting Dildo was the brewery, and for good reason, as we found out. The stout Dildo is an amazing brew, and we enjoyed a good dinner with our friend. Time to head towards St. John's. We set up our camp at the Pippi Park campground. Only a few steps outside the park is a bus stop. No better way to explore the city than with public transport. Our destination was downtown, but we disembarked the bus when we noticed the Basilica Cathedral of St. John the Baptist. The interior of the church was well worth a visit. From there we walked towards Signal Hill. We were looking for a sign that said, "You are here at Jellybean Row." We didn't find the sign. Before we attempted the climb to Signal Hill, we had to refuel at the Battery Cafe. Up the hill to the tower. We enjoyed the view from the top of the Cabot Tower like a gazillion visitors before us. After the visit to the museum, we took the North Head Trail down to the Battery Lookout and closed the loop at the Battery Cafe. What an amazing hike! It is less than 2 kilometers with lots of places to stop and enjoy the view. By now it was time for dinner. We headed to the St. John's Fish Exchange kitchen. This place was packed. We were lucky and got in without a reservation. It is an upscale Canadian eatery. The dinner was excellent but on the pricey side. After the meal we headed to George and Water Street, well known for the many pubs and the screech-in ceremony to become an honorary Newfoundlander. It is a popular practice that draws a lot of visitors. These are some of our impressions of this well-known place. Remember the sightseeing boat when we came down from the North Head Trail from Signal Hill? Now we are on the other side of the Narrows, that is the harbour entrance. We took a walk along the docks to see the fishing boats and we headed towards the Fort Amherst lighthouse. Enough about St. John's. We had a good time there and enjoyed great meals. Yeah, we took it easy with cooking while in St. John's. Next visit was to Cape Spear Lighthouse. There are 2 of them. The tall one on the left is the new lighthouse from 1955 and replaced the one built in 1835. The 3-mast system beside the old lighthouse was used to communicate between the ships and the shore. Remember Signal Hill in St. John's? They have the same 3-mast on top of the tower. The flags were duplicated on Signal Hill to prepare for the ship's arrival in St. John's. Fascinating. There are many more stories surrounding the Cape Spear Lighthouse and Fort Cape Spear just below the lighthouse. It also happens to be the easternmost point in Canada and North America. Heading south on the Avalon Peninsula to Mistaken Point Ecological Reserve. The reserve is the best place in the world where you can see a 565-million-year-old seafloor that accurately preserves the ecology of these ancient deep-sea communities. Oh look, a whale! The foxes were waiting for the tourists, begging for scraps in exchange for a snapshot. But please, don't feed them, just enjoy their visit. The Cape Race Lighthouse is at the very bottom of the peninsula. It was the closest land base to the Titanic that sank in 1912. Cape Race had been relaying passengers' messages and eventually the distress calls from the Titanic. It is a remote place away from Highway 10 with an impressive coastline. Staying in St. John's, it is impossible to ignore the East Coast Trail. It is a 336-kilometer trail system starting south of St. John's and leading all the way to Cape St. Francis on top of the peninsula and south again on Conception Bay. We picked a short section of the trail to the Red Cliff radar station. It is less than 10 kilometers north of St. John's. The radar station operated from 1953 to 1961 as a surveillance radar station. We found several other buildings along the coast. When we tried to get the ferry from Argentia to Nova Scotia, it was fully booked. We had to come up with a new plan. But first, this is the last episode in our Newfoundland and Labrador trip, but not the last travel story. Please hit the subscribe button and follow us to Graham and Anne in New Brunswick. If you don't know the island, you will be surprised. Anyway, we decided to drive the 900 kilometers to Port aux Basques and take the ferry from there. With only 4 days left on the island, we picked the 2 nicest places for our overnight stay. The first was the community pasture in Buena Vista. We talked about the place in our last episode number 4. And we spent the remaining days in our favorite campground in Roberts Arm, the Crescent Lake RV Park from episode number 3. We did a quick cost calculation of the 3 different ferries that get you to Newfoundland. We came via the Trans-Labrador Highway. The ferry cost $60 but over $900 in gas. The Argentia ferry that was booked is about $500 and $500 in gas. And the Port aux Basques ferry to Nova Scotia is about $250 and the gas is $650. In the end, no matter which ferry you take, it costs between $900 to $1,000 to get from St. John's to Montreal. Along the way to Port aux Basques, we stopped in Corner Brook for a coffee. After the visit, we were ready to spend the night at the ferry dock waiting to leave the island. We were not done with the trip yet. We arrived in Nova Scotia and drove to Waikokoma Provincial Park. The weather was nice and we had to revisit the Cabot Trail on Cape Breton Island. Last time we had fog and rain, but that's a story for another time. Thank you for watching and we'll see you out there.